for inviting us. Well appreciated. Rather than a presentation, I'm just going to have a conversation, around the post-COVID consequences of business. I think it's important from the South African context when we relate, I think, to post-COVID-19 and the impact on business, that we must always remember that it is not business as usual in South Africa. Of course, the impact to business in general is going to be severe, but the bigger impact is on SMMEs and smaller companies. They are the ones who are actually bearing the brunt, as it were. And therefore, it becomes important when we talk about the economy that we should not forget the disparities within the economy. In fact, we have had conversations during this period when there was contestation and competition on the funding which has been allocated for COVID-19 relief. We have seen SMMEs, and in particular, we have had the Black Business Council as an example, asserting the fact that most SMMEs have not been able to access the bulk of the funding. Most of the funding obviously went to large companies. And therefore, what it means is that the bigger is still getting bigger, even under these circumstances. It is therefore important that the economy should self-correct, as it were. Therefore, we need to address this issue from an economic transformation perspective in order for us to deal, I think, with these disparities, as it were. We are still struggling to dismantle the economic architecture of apartheid, as it is. The spatial formation of the economy is such that the townships still remain the barracks where people stay, and what we call going to town, that's where the economy is. So we need to be able, therefore, to change the apartheid legacy and change the economic architecture. And for me, I see an opportunity of the market and business self-correct in this era, as it were. It provides us the opportunity to enable government and private sector to invest more on SMMEs in order for us to balance and to stabilize the economy. Therefore, there should be more increased economic activity towards underserved and underinvested areas such as townships and rural areas, as it were. Therefore, there needs to be more aggressive investment in manufacturing and economic infrastructure in the township so that we can create more jobs, so that we can also arrest the leakage of revenues in the townships, because a lot of money that is generated even from people in the township, as soon as it is earned, it leaves and go to other communities. Therefore, we need to ensure that we can enable the townships to become our new economic hubs, as it is. Therefore, it is therefore important that the private sector and government should invest in productive capacity and competency to enable that we create new markets, that we create new entrepreneurs, that we even create a new economy, as it were. Because with big businesses, you can't grow big businesses more than they are now. And therefore, the opportunity is to increase localization strategy and invest a massive investment in developing especially our manufacturing capacity. We are sitting now and which is, for me, is the elephant in the room, is that the economy is dominated by a few large companies that continues to procure service from your, what I call the old boys club. You know, the economic system is so embedded in such a way that the large companies continue to be vertically integrated into the old economy, as it were. It is very difficult even for investors that are coming out of other countries to invest in South Africa because of the way that the country is monopolized, the way that the value chains are so integrated that it becomes very, very difficult to penetrate, because even your supply base, the supply vendors, I mean, if you look at the retail sector, there are over 70 large vendors which are suppliers that are supplying into the retail sector. But new entrants, you know, Black-owned companies, Black women companies that are beginning to get into agriculture and agro-processing are finding it very difficult to find their products in the shelves of the majors. It is very, very difficult. Therefore, there needs to be a deliberate strategy that enables the changing of that trajectory, as it were. SMMEs can only succeed. In fact, business is about value chains. If SMMEs do not have access to large major value chains of leading companies, they are bound to fail. Therefore, there need to be that deliberate strategy. Yes, government is the driver, I think, of transformation in this country. But the success of transformation would not come from government. It would come from big business embracing transformation without any punishment, without any carrots and stick. It just becomes important that business should enable internal growth. Most of large companies are still aligning their major value chains to international manufacturers, you know, as it were. Therefore, we need to break that trend. Therefore, that is why I'm saying we need to increase South Africa's manufacturing capability and capacity in major sectors, you know, of the economy, to invest in capacity of SMMEs so that SMMEs, I think, can grow. Now, the major impediment is that from a South African perspective, SMMEs are looked at as perpetual SMMEs. You know, it's almost like, let's solve this problem, and you throw a bit of crumbs, you throw a bit of money, but you cannot grow SMMEs. That's why perpetually they will die. We need to deliberately engage big business in particular to open up their value chains and ensure that SMMEs can get floor space, particularly in the retail sector and other sectors as it were. So it is very important to all of us to have national interest. National interest to me says, how do we place significant equity of the economy at the hands of the majority of the people? What are those things that we need to do? How, therefore, do we break the abnormal normal? How do you break that abnormal normal, as it were? Because for change to happen, something ought to break. There is something that should break if we were to change, you know, as it were. Therefore, we need to emulate what Afrikaners have done. You know, with Afrikaners, there was a simple policy that said, as Afrikaner government, we are going to change the lives of what then was perceived as barefooted, semi-literate Afrikaners, who most of them were in the agriculture sector. So the Afrikaner were occupying 2% of the economy, which was agrarian. And therefore, they took a deliberate strategy to say, how to empower our people. They used state-owned enterprises, which they call parastatals. They created technicons They created space for people. They actually use parastatals, that's what are called shop floor universities for Afrikaners. And today, the economy is 60% owned, by Afrikaners, as it were, the richest people in this country. If you look anyway, you'll go to the Stellenbosch, the Stellenbosch entrepreneurs there. They control, the major banks, they control the major value chains. Therefore, we need to have a deliberate strategy. We have BES, in some instance, it has served its purpose, but we need a new, we need new instruments. I know there's this draft procurement bill, which is currently under discussion, under National Treasury. If you just look at that bill, it's far from actually addressing what it ought to address, and it needs to be overhauled. We need a deliberate agenda of government that says this is what needs to be done, and the private sector shall have to comply, as it were, because South Africa needs the creation of new entrepreneurs, new economy, new money, as it were. And of course, as we move to what we term post-COVID, even though the minister says there will not be post-COVID. In a way, in a sense, he's right. But at the end of the day, we will go to some sort of normal. What that says to SMMEs in particular, they need to do things differently. They need to be able now to embrace the digital economy, which means they must have their own digital identifiers, which means they must be able to transact online, as it were. There must therefore be a massive drive towards digitalization of businesses. One abnormality in most businesses and SMMEs is that they have their emails as Gmails, etc. But businesses need to have their own, what I call digital identifiers to enable them to thrive, because more and more transactions are going to be online. Therefore, business, I think, needs to adapt or die. So with that, I would like to stop here and perhaps engage.
Thank you, Dr. Qubeka. For this one, I think I'm going to hand over to Gcobisa to kick off the Q&A. Gcobisa, are you there? We can't hear you.
Her mic is off.
Okay, can you hear me then? Okay, I think let's allow questions for Xolani and see if anyone has got questions for him, and then thereafter
there aren't any at the moment.
Close if there's no more questions from the participants.
There aren't any at the moment. Maybe I'll kick off with one. Dr. Qubeka, what do you think is holding back SMMEs, especially Black SMMEs, from having these digital identifiers that you speak of, in terms of having digital identities or moving to digital platforms, especially in townships also?
Well, I think it's but which means people are accustomed to doing things the way that they do. And I think people are taking technology for granted. All a person wants is an email address, but that email address more often than not is not linked to the business. Therefore, I think there needs to be a campaign, particularly around 4IR, that begins to get SMMEs to appreciate the digital world if they are, I think, to succeed. And again, there's a major differentiator between older businesses and youth-owned businesses, because the youth have embraced technology and they continue to embrace technology, as it were. So for the need to be a drive, I know, for instance, the Department of Communication is very concerned, that there are about 3 million, I think, registered email domain, in this country, and very, very less are from small businesses, as it were, and they would like to push that quite substantively, as it were. So I think from a communication and education perspective, I think both the private sector and government need to be able to empower SMEs in that regard.
Thank you. Are there any questions from any of our attendees on? Oh, there's one that's popped up. Let me just check it quickly. Give me a few seconds. Okay, it's quite a quick question quickly.
Yes, I've got one question here. The speaker mentioned the township economies, yet recently we've seen examples of big corporates like ShopRite entering the very same economy that we label as township economies. So the question is here, do we really have township economies? Because what SMEs, which I also agree with this question, is that due to lack of access to capital, they are unable actually to take up opportunities that gets presented. I mean, by 4IR, which is one of them. And now with the COVID, there's a lot of opportunities, supplying of materials, like with the spaza shops as well, but people are unable to take up those opportunities because of not having adequate capital. And then what are your thoughts on that, Mr. Qubeka?
Well, I think first, the type of problem we have, it is demonstrable in my way of a lack of goodwill on the part of government to protect, I think, the township businesses. Is it where, I mean, you go to Brazil or you go to even Ghana, they've got trading laws, that prohibit foreign investment in specific communities. It's the same thing in Brazil. There are specific sectors that are ring-fenced for local businesses, as it were. My view is that there are certain sectors that need to be protected against erosion. I mean, the township economy was built on the retail sector. When we grew up, there were very vibrant retail stores, corner stores, and all of those type of things. And you no longer see them. Therefore, we need to be able to get lawmakers, to make the necessary provisions that enable and protect local businesses, as it were, because even those Pick n Pays and so on that goes to the township, it's still a white brand, but they give franchises to Black people. Why can't we get the same banks to support the creation of the entire value chain of businesses? As I alluded earlier, I said we must invest in economic infrastructure. And by that, I'm not saying we should then open that economic infrastructure to establish business, but to new businesses that can be able to thrive in their own, economy. So in Soweto alone, the population there's about 3 million. So that is an economy, but that economy needs to be protected. There's a lot of buying power, but it needs to be ring-fenced. That's why earlier I said we need to find ways of arresting the leakage of revenues out of the townships. You can go to Lenasia, you can go to Lodiam, where the most of the residents and businesses are Indian, and there's nothing wrong, I think, with that. It is very difficult for Black people to break into those communities. Therefore, we need to be able to deliberately protect those businesses in the townships and rural areas.
Great. There's a question here from Zalo. Let me start with the one from DSET. It says that Qubeka, when we speak about digitizing township businesses, would you not say access to fiber optic cables or ADSL may be a major contributing factor?
Okay, first, while I appreciate technology, I'm not an expert, but all that I hear the question saying is that we need to get an appropriate infrastructure that enables businesses to be able, I think, to be connected. That's really what the question is. So we need appropriate technologies. But having said that, people are using are consuming digital product. People buy data at the end of the day. So people still buy data and people get connected. What we're saying is they must then begin to have their own digital identifiers. I was saying in another group that what would happen if Facebook goes? What would happen if Twitter goes? How do we create our own platforms? We are now on Zoom here. What is difficult for us to invest? Because we've got smart guys here. We had a webinar on Sunday. Smart young guys that created the entire platform, integrated into WhatsApp, into Zoom, into Facebook, into Twitter. Why can't we be the creators of those instruments and have our own digital identifiers? We need to be very aggressive and don't talk 4IR as if it's fashion. 4IR is not fashion. 4IR is an enabler, as it were, and we need to appreciate it as it is and embrace it.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I think we've got about 3 more questions. Let me just go through them quickly. The first one says that at Qubeka, you mentioned that 60% of the economy is owned by Afrikaners. How do we deliberately start changing that? What needs to be done? Because clearly BEE was not that effective.
Okay, first let me first explain what I was saying. There is always this notion that the government is the biggest purchaser of goods and services, which is incorrect. The biggest users and purchasers and procurement of services is the private sector. So if you just look at the retail sector, you look at the housing sector, just to give you 2 sectors, as it were. And for me, I don't think changing the present resolves us, but it's what we do going forward. For me, what is important is how do we create new capacity, new capability? How do we distribute wealth from the point of creation? I said earlier, for me, national interest is that how do you place significant equity of the economy in the hands of the majority? So what it means is those that have had their chance, like established business, should get less opportunities from the private sector, from government. We may not see the change we want today. Maybe our grandchildren will see it. So we must have a long-term view. Similarly to Afrikaners, when in 1948 they took over, Afrikaners occupied 2% of the economy. So the change we want will not happen today, but we need to put the right building blocks today to say 10, 15 years that we occupy at least 60% or more of the economy. It's an evolution. It will not happen now. What we need to do, we need to have, I think, the right attitude as government, as investors, as SMMEs, as the private sector that says, let's grow the South African economy. Let's not depend on imports. How do we become an export-oriented country? So how do we reinvest in our own economy through localization and ensure that we ourselves become the exporters in the economy? So it is a long-term view that will not happen overnight. But we need to say how you cannot deal with the economy of the past what you need to do is how do we capture the current opportunities moving forward and ensure that to a large extent they are ring-fenced for SMMEs, for Black-owned businesses. That's the only way that we can succeed.
Thank you for that. I think that wraps up our questions. Unless Gcobisa, you've got another question? We didn't hear you there. Your mic was off.
Uthetha wedwa.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now we can.
I think I see that Dr. Edwards is not on. Can you hear now? Oh, okay. Apologies for that. I think Dr. Edwards has not joined us yet. But what I suggest is let's take one more question for, I think there was a couple there on the list for Xolani, and then thereafter we close. And then we took note of some of the questions that we were not able to, was not able to answer. And then we'll forward those questions to him, and then we'll provide the proper feedback actually to all the attendees, just to make sure that he addresses those. And then the other thing, a suggestion is, as well as we close, we need to come up with the agenda that Xolani has mentioned, to say it's good and nice to talk about these things, but until we make our voices heard, to say, I think this is what we expect from the government, actually, in terms of that deliberate agenda. And then how then can we move forward in terms of partnering with the government to assist us with all these challenges that SMEs they find themselves having to operate in. I mean, one point you mentioned is that we have to break the abnormal, which has become our normal, which is absolutely not acceptable. So I think let's get one more question, and then we take summarize the questions that we're not able to respond to, and then we formulate that agenda. I think probably we've been talking too much and things are not moving. And it has become evident actually with this COVID-19. It's just, it gave us an opportunity so that we can be exposed to say, this is who we are. You know, this is what big corporates are doing to the SMEs. This is what the government are doing to the SMEs, because they're not able to survive this pandemic. So to me, until we organize ourselves to say, this is the agenda. If we say let's form partnership, what does that really mean? And then we can take the conversation forward. So let's take one more question, therefore, for Dr. Xolani, and then we can close the session.
No problem. There's a question from Ubakeng Matolo. He says, we have a lot of ICT SMMEs in different sectors of technology. Don't you think if we were to appoint or give responsibility of propelling for our launches to them would make a difference in the stigma inferiority amongst our people?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Your mic was unstable.
Sure. It says we have a lot of ICT SMMEs in different sectors of technology in South Africa. Don't you think if we were to appoint or give responsibility of propelling for IR to them in townships, it would make a difference and eradicate inferiority?
Yeah, I hope I understood the question. Look, I think we need to give the responsibility of the companies themselves in appreciating 4IR, as it were, because especially if companies that are being referred to are ICT companies. They themselves should have the knowledge and access, to information. I have learned from wanting and seeking information. One of the biggest asset of any person or business is access to relevant information and knowing how to source information. So it is important for ICT companies, because most of them are small, first to collaborate, to be able, I think, to build capacity and capability, and be able to drive their own, I think, strategy, as it were, and also be a part of some of the structures within ICT. I mean, for instance, there's the National ICT Chamber that hosted the ITU's World Telecoms Day on Sunday. It was an absolute success, and it was young people who were doing things that I didn't think were capable of doing. Therefore, they should learn from each other. People should not work in silos. People should try to club together to enable access to knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge out there. There's the internet. I mean, the age of internet enable us to do business, I think, differently, and to have access much, much more faster and differently. You have, as a small business, you have to be a learning organization.
Thank you for that. Gcobisa, you want to wrap up with us? I don't see Dr. Edgar's with us yet.
Yeah, sorry, I just communicated with him. He said he's wrapping up. So I don't think he'll manage. It's a UN session.
Okay. I think we'll wrap up and maybe try and schedule a separate session with him, if it's fine with everybody.
Colleagues, I think thank you, and thanks Tefo for your assistance actually in putting all this together, and then in the absence as well the other panel speakers, thank you very much, and for the preparation. I think just to close up and to wrap tonight's discussion, starting from Untate Billy. One thing that we need to take note of is to say, whether you're in business, whether you're in a corporate environment, there is gonna be a visible culture change. And one other point that he mentioned is that the roadmap for the future will definitely be different. And especially for leaders, we have to start positioning ourselves as coaches to our employees rather than the traditional bosses, because we need to reignite purpose for our people. So to me, those are the points that we really need to start internalizing and look at how best then can we implement these in our environment in response to this pandemic as well, and also positioning ourselves for the future. Actually, after the lockdown, there is still business that still needs to continue. And then the key aspects, which I've already summarized from Untate Tito, was that there will be no phase actually that we can really touch and say this is a post-COVID-19 phase. It's going to be continuity. It's not going to be normal again. So we have to change gears. I think that's the main message that you are saying. We have to change the gears and go back to basics and discontinue with some of the things that probably have become part of our daily lives, as we also so that it can position ourselves to be able to be agile. As the economies are changes, we must be able to agile. And one key aspect that he mentioned is that the global economic lessons are very critical at this stage, because this COVID-19 is not only affecting Africa, it is affecting the entire world. And lastly, from Mr. Qubeka, what we need to take out, especially from small businesses, and my heart actually, I work very close with young people, is the impact, that the impact of this COVID is more experienced actually by small businesses and youth driven businesses. Actually, that's where they are. Actually, some have already closed doors already. Hence, I said earlier on in the introduction that we are already feeling the impact. People are not able to survive. And the last stats that I saw from CCMA is that they've already received, close to 30 applications to retrench from big corporates. So the impact is there already. However, the challenges that we are facing is that the economic architecture that has been established by the government of the past, it makes it really difficult for us to penetrate some of these markets. And that's where most of the opportunities are. And until we start working together, and until we start being innovative and start thinking about outside the box, because some of these things we're not going to be able to realize now. I took note of that. It's you have to place, to map actually the way forward, to say we're going to realize some of these opportunities later, but let's start now actually to map a way forward for the future generations. So with those closing comments, I would like to say from my side, thank you everyone for honoring the invite. As I said, we have recorded the session both in video and available to everybody. We're not being able to address. We will look at that and we still allow opportunity as part of the group. People are part of the group actually to raise more questions, and then we take it up actually with the panelists so that everybody can be addressed. That's it from my side. Thank you, Tefo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gcobisa. Thank you very much, Dr. Qubeka. Thank you to everybody attending and who stayed for 2 hours to listen to all the panelists and participate and ask questions. Hope to continue the engagements after this. Thank you.